Welcome to the latest episode of Sustainability Talks. I'm your host, Patrick Sheehan, Managing Partner of ETF Partners, Europe's leading venture capital firm focused on backing businesses that deliver what we call sustainability through innovation. Now, in this episode of ETF Partners podcast, I'm delighted to have one of the world's most celebrated and formidable leaders in green finance and ESG, Dame Elizabeth Corley. Elizabeth has over 45 years' experience in financial services and is currently chairman of Schroders, as well as the Impact Investing Institute. Former roles include being CEO of Allianz Global Investors, and she worked with Merrill Lynch, Coopers & Lybrand, and did many amazing things. She's also non-executive director of BAE Systems and the Green Finance Institute, as well as being a trustee of the British Museum. So it's remarkable to me that she's also a published author of 5 novels, which I would love to touch on in the talk. So, Elizabeth, it's a pleasure to have you on our podcast, and you've had a stellar career. When I look back at it, I could see you've risen through the ranks. You've done amazing things, not least as CEO of Allianz Global Investors. And yet it's been a very conventional career initially, and you've diverted at some stage towards a real interest in sustainability. I really want to ask you out the gate, how did that happen and when did that happen?
Okay, well, thanks, Patrick, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about a passion of mine. Well, I think I've always been interested in the sustainability aspects of investment management and a huge believer in the role of capital markets to do good, but in a very general way, not a specific way. And then I would say 2016, 2017, I was contacted by the British government to basically help them answer a question, which was, why was it that despite the fact that the UK was an early pioneer in impact investing and in the whole role of finance for social good, why was it that we were not keeping pace in terms of innovation and the take-up of it? And particularly, why was it that individuals, when they were making decisions on their ISAs, their savings, their pensions, why was it that they couldn't simply tick a box and say, I want my money to do good as well as to earn me a return? It was a very simple question to which there was a complicated answer. So I set up basically an advisory group to the government. We made recommendations, the vast majority of which were actually about the industry and the way in which the industry needed to evolve and take this up and take it close to their heart. There were a few for government, a few for regulators, but mostly it was about the industry taking it seriously. And I realised as I looked at it that I got far more focused on what did we mean by the power of capital for good. And what does it really mean? And how could you really be sure that you were doing it rather than just having great intentions? And that's what really prompted my strong interest, not just in sustainability, but in impact investing, which is a step further into that sustainability curve. And from then, frankly, it's impossible to let it go because you realise this is absolutely what the future of capital markets is going to be. It sits very well alongside strategies for growth and for returns for individuals and society. And so it hasn't stopped since then.
Why is this the future then, if I may ask? Because you obviously believe it is, but it's, what convinced you?
I think there were several factors there. One was this wasn't just specialists talking about it. When I started to talk to colleagues of mine with sort of classic mainstream backgrounds and careers, everybody was interested. Everybody was interested. So it was like there was a zeitgeist of relevance for talking about what sustainable finance really meant. And that was true in multiple countries. This wasn't just a UK phenomenon. So first of all, it was very clear that this was a hot topic. And not just a sort of fanciful hot topic, something that people were taking very seriously. Secondly, clients and customers were wanting their asset managers and their advisors to be more accountable and to explain precisely where their money was going and why it was going there. And whereas previously there was a sort of level of disinterest, as long as I'm getting a good return, as long as you're taking the appropriate amount of risk, I really don't mind where it goes. This was sharpening up. And that was both institutional and individuals. And then I think the third thing for me, what really moved it for me was a realization that we have a sort of classic career of looking at risk and return in one bucket and looking at outcomes and impact in another. And actually that's an artificial separation because the act of making an investment or financing decision has an impact. You may be choosing not to measure it and you may not know how to measure it, but it has an impact. That decision has an outcome that you need to be aware of. And then if you really want to be intentional about it and start thinking about the fact that money can really drive positive outcomes, it gets incredibly exciting. So that was a general awakening. And then, of course, in the same time, you had the UN Sustainable Development Goals. You had people starting to ask their pension funds, their advisors, how is my money contributing to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals? And then you had really doubling down from that, an awareness of the climate challenges, the environmental challenges, and some of the social injustices that we were living with in the world. So it all came together actually into a perfect mix.
You really got into it then in 2016, which I guess counts as early days.
Yes, I mean, before that, I was very aware of ESG, so-called, and I mean, we had a number of products and services which were around environmental, social and governance controls. But I would say it was very much more a risk management tool at that point. How do we avoid doing things that could do harm? And what really started to shift for me in 2016, 2017 was this awareness that you can go way beyond the avoidance of harm into creating real benefits and actually helping to find solutions to some of the world's most chronic problems by using private capital well.
And so is that the difference between ESG and impact then?
Well, I think ESG was sort of coined as a convenience term for non-financial measures that ought to be recorded. And it was, if you think about it, it's very odd. You bucket together some environmental stuff, some social stuff, and some governance stuff. They don't really belong together that well, but they were a useful term for thinking about the things that won't appear in a P&L account or a balance sheet, at least not in this sort of current financial reporting period. So for me, it was less a sort of move from ESG to impact, and more thinking through sustainability and what sustainable finance meant, moving into impact, as you say, Patrick, really being very aware of what differentiates that, which is around intentionality of an outcome that goes beyond the financial return and the measurement of its impact, and then an accountability to deliver that impact. And I began to realize that this was a very powerful force if it could be harnessed and utilized.
Absolutely. And yet I see you or hear you picking your way carefully through the terminology here. You said, I think ESG as a term was useful, and you're going beyond that now, talking about sustainability, intentionality, and so on. So is our language really fit for purpose at the moment, do you think?
I think it's got a lot better in the last 8 to 9 years. We're getting much more precise about the use of terminology. There is some very good work done by the GIN. There's some very good work done by the Impact Management Project and now ISSB, really clarifying terminology. And I think one of the things we discovered when we looked at why was this not adopted so often, there was many reasons. One was basically financial advisors and investors are not trained around sustainability and impact. That was a major block. Secondly, people didn't really know what information to look for and therefore what data to ask for. And thirdly, the terminology was confusing, that there was a whole multiple set of very well-intentioned language being used. So yes, being clearer on the use of language and then being consistent in the use of language certainly helps people's understanding without doubt, which is why we're really pleased. I mean, one of our sponsors at the Impact Investing Institute is the CFA Institute of the United States. We have a member of actually the CEO of the CFA UK Society on our board. We're absolutely delighted that they're really focusing on their curriculum to a high standard and getting sort of certificated qualifications for people. And they've already done some on sustainability, and now they're hopefully shortly going to launch something on impact as well. And this will get that language embedded in the way in which we think about it. And we're quite a jargon-ridden industry anyway. We talk about, Sharpe ratios and all sorts of coefficients and things like that. But we know what we mean because we've been doing it for a long time. Now we need to get much more consistent in the role of language. And that's something that the Impact Investing Institute really promotes and encourages wherever we can. And anybody wanting to find out more on this podcast, Patrick, there's a really good learning centre on our website, which is free. It's a public good. It's a utility there. And there's quite a lot of information in there that I think people would find useful.
Oh, that's fantastic, because I, as people might know, I have a bee in my bonnet about the need for very simple common language around this topic.
Yes.
And I suspect most of our audience haven't actually heard of the Impact Investing Institute, although it's a marvellous organisation. So I'd love it if you would explain just what it is, what it intends to do a little bit. And this is unashamedly saying advertise it for us, because I think it's
So this is my moment of self-promotion, is it, Patrick? Thank you very much. Okay, so the Impact Investing Institute was born out of the work we did for government, actually. We got this fantastic multi-sectoral group together to look at impact investing and how we could really make it take off in the UK. And then once we'd got together, people didn't want to disband. And we realised actually that we were part of changing the way in which the system worked with a very practical focus, which I'll come back to. Sometimes people call us a think tank. We're not really a think tank. We're much more practical than that. We want to find tools and solutions for people to use day to day including simple language, products they can find, solutions they can find. And so out of the task force work, we basically decided that we should form a small but pretty powerful central group of permanent colleagues, financed by a mix of financial services companies, the City of London and the government, to really promote impact investing and to deliver on some very ambitious programs that would mean that the financial services system would have a significantly better set of tools and techniques that they could use, plus a point to meet and convene and discuss issues as they emerged. And so we formed the Impact Investing Institute. We have a great board, a fantastic executive. And for the last nearly 4 years now, we've been delivering on our programme and our commitment. And the whole purpose of it is to mobilise private capital into the places that need it most, both for people and for planet, and to get impact from that capital and be accountable for it. So we're very, very mission focused and very practical in our mindset.
It does genuinely sound great to me, and yet slightly provocative perhaps. I get very confused between the Impact Investing Institute, the Green Finance Institute. There's so many initiatives now. How do you get coherence around all these initiatives? I know you're chairing Investment Institute and you're on the board, I think, of the Green Finance Institute. So help me through the differences and the simplicity around this.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, the sister institutes formed at roughly the same time. And the late Sir Roger Gifford and I basically got together pretty early on when we were looking at the fact that there was the government were looking at green finance and others elsewhere, they were looking at impact investing. And we basically shared the work and recommendations we were giving to government. We identified the areas where we were overlapping and work for common cause. And we identified the areas of difference. So when we set up the two institutes, we were very conscious of the fact that we were working side by side with subtly different but important differences in the agendas. So the Green Finance Institute's gone from strength to strength in actually finding ways to finance green. So looking at solutions around the built environment, automotives, electric vehicles, nature now as well. So very focused again on how can we make sure that finance flows to green initiatives. On the Impact Investing Institute, we're slightly more agnostic as to whether it's green or social. We actually think the two go very much together. And in fact, we collaborate and collaborated very strongly for example, in working with the UK government on the issuance of green plus gilts. These are the government's first green gilt issuance where they had social benefits as well as green benefits in the use of proceeds gilts that they came up with. So we find ways of working together in concert. The Net Zero Delivery Summit for the City of London, we find that we've got opportunities to collaborate. And probably the area where we're closest is on some of the work we do, led more by the Institute, the Impact Investing Institute, on just transition finance, which is looking at the way in which we can mobilise capital to achieve a net zero outcome, which is fair and inclusive, whether that's domestic or in other parts of the world.
Okay, you're touching on one of the things I wanted to come to there is what the challenges are today, because you said earlier that, if I paraphrase, everyone's going sustainable today, right? This is mainstream now, or becoming mainstream. So the challenges must be moving along. And are you less evangelical? What are the key challenges today?
Well, funny enough, I think some of the core challenges are the same, which is, maybe we should talk a little bit about the role of technology and the role of data. So how do you evidence outcomes and impacts? And what is the information that's going to provide substance around that commitment to the impact? So data was a problem, a challenge. The lack of availability of consistent data was a challenge when I first got involved. It's still a challenge today. We've made huge strides on TCFD in terms of carbon in particular, science-based targets. That's a fantastic step forward. But actually beyond that, even when you move into nature, we're still finding our way to really articulate how finance delivers impact once you move beyond something which can be counted through a science-based target. So we tend to use proxies. On the social side, it could be inclusive employment, it could be fair living standards, it could be anti-slavery, educational outcomes or health outcomes. So there are proxies we can use, but the availability of data is still something which requires an enormous focus. And we're very supportive of the work of the ISSB and others in terms of moving forward towards reporting in a consistent global manner, because capital is global and we need consistent systems. So that's a common challenge. Second challenge is people, even when they want to do this, struggle to find products and services easily. And that's particularly true for individuals. And why is that? Well, because we don't have clear labeling and clear signposting to products. And that's why I think the regulatory interventions in Europe and the UK, where they're really looking at ways of helping the individual saver who may not be financially sophisticated, but nevertheless knows exactly what they want their money to do. How do we help them find products that are appropriate for their needs? And that's the individual. In the institutional space, it's still sometimes challenging, even when large bodies of money like pension funds, foundations, and endowments they have a big fiduciary responsibility, and they want to know when they do something that not only do they commit to it with intentionality, they can then measure the impact. So we work quite a lot with pension funds, and we're doing some work currently for foundations. And an example of that, again, if you look at our website, is our just transition finance criteria. These were sourced with significant input from mainstream financial as well as specialist financial services organizations, both asset owners and asset managers. And this is a framework that enables people to report on what they wanted to do, their intention, and the impact. And it does so over a longer time frame. So I think some of these challenges are still there. In the old ESG space, I think we've shaken out a lot of the misunderstandings that there were, where it tended to be used as a bit of a marketing label as opposed to a substantive product criteria. A lot of that's been shaken out, and now people are very sensitive, product providers, service providers, of not falling foul of inadvertently greenwashing or rainbow washing their products.
No, that's very fair. And I'm going to stick on this data question for a while, because we are very conscious of what we're aiming to invest in and the impact it's having. And the people who invest in our funds similarly are very keen to understand these things. And one of the byproducts of all this is we get requests for data, but lots of requests for lots of different formats of data.
Yes.
And ultimately these get passed to the small companies we invest in, and we have to shield them from it because it's overwhelming. And so actually the attitude sort of is at the moment often the data is unclear, I should ask for more data.
I think that is a challenge, and particularly when the weight of that reporting falls on small and medium-sized enterprises who just don't have that resource, particularly if they are impact-driven and purpose-driven. Getting the financials together is one thing. Then getting all this other information together in different formats is a challenge. There are many initiatives to try and codify private equity reporting. And I think in the listed sector, you can see more and more work being done now on public listed. The World Benchmarking Alliance does sector-specific work. The Transition Plan Task Force, which we're involved in at the Institute, is also going to be producing sector-specific guides, because the reality is there will be some general information which is applicable to all well-run enterprises who have got real purpose behind them. And that could be on inclusion, diversity, equality. But there's things that get very, very specific once you get into a particular industry or sector. And I think the work that's being done there is going to be absolutely transformational. Then we need to think about how we pare that down so that small and medium-sized enterprises don't get crushed by that data need. I think part of the experimentation, though, is people are still not yet quite sure about cause and effect. What is really driving the impact that we need? And therefore, in a way, the work that happens over time in sort of classic investment management or classic credit rating, which is a correlation between the information you have and the likelihood of an outcome, I think we're still very much in a journey to find that correlation. So in a way, some of this data is being asked, I think, in the hope that it's indicative or proxy for the outcome that people are wanting. But actually, I think some of it was still quite at an early experimentation stage. And so we just need to be very, very thoughtful about paring that back and having a proper conversation. When I talk to some of our financial services supporters, when they engage with companies that they're investing in, they spend as much time trying to understand that company and what that company's trying to do, what that enterprise is trying to do. And then from that, the information that will flow naturally from the company's activities. There's no point trying to force a company to do something. And I'm sure you do the same in your own engagements.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more, really, that we try to keep things as simple as we dare. We try to speak in the language of the companies. And yet this creates a problem, which you've sort of touched on, is the language of company A is different to the language of company B. And since the Impact Investment Institute covers a wide range of fields, it's very hard to aggregate impact to provide a meaningful summary.
Well, it's interesting. So some of our financial service supporters do that. They will have invested in significant data insights units using AI or other sort of machine learning means to try and gather information in a way which is less intrusive into the underlying investees. But it does take a lot of information to do that. I think one of our particular supporters is very focused on a very specific set of outcomes. And in they're just doing an asset raise. And part of the asset raise is really working on what are the relevant indicators of the impact. And therefore, when they're looking for their investments, they're going to be looking for investments that will help them evidence that impact. And it's becoming almost part of the investment criteria.
And I'm just going to move the conversation ever so slightly now, because in addition to chairing the Institute, you also chair Schroders, right? So you've come on board there, a couple of years ago to an august institution with a heritage. And clearly you've come with a mission. How's that gone?
I'm not sure I came with a mission, actually. I think I wouldn't have joined a company that didn't fundamentally believe in the role of sustainable finance. And I'd come across Schroders, first of all, going way back, years and years ago. They were a very early supporter of the Impact Investing Institute. They were one of the very first companies to come on board and support us. So we knew them through the work they were actually doing. Secondly, the investment they made in Blue Orchard, which is a genuine impact investor, the work they've done in investing in their own methodologies on SustainX and other areas. So I was very aware that this was an authentic approach, even though it was a large company. So when I was approached as to whether I'd put my hat in the ring to be considered for a future chair, candidly, it was one of the few listed companies I thought they're really doing it seriously and taking this as part of strategy. And certainly what we find talking to many of our financial services supporters, and you asked about changes over the last sort of 5-6 years, this has moved from an interesting sideline in some companies to being central to strategy and central to the purpose of the organization. And that's certainly true at Schroders. So I think it was less my mission and more about the fact that there was an alignment of minds. And I felt that this was a company that could be very exciting to become part of.
Wow, very good. So just because it's a big vehicle doesn't mean it can't corner faster.
Well, I think you have to be very careful about where you corner, and there will be parts of the portfolio that are not classic Article 8 and using common parlance and jargon. There'll be parts of the portfolio that aren't. But the thing is that they don't pretend they are. They're very, very clear about the role of capital and what it's doing in different circumstances for different clients. And I think, yes, you can be agile as a large organization, particularly if you believe in acquisitions of highly interesting companies, and then you don't mess with them when you've acquired them. So there's no point buying an organization like Blue Orchard or investing as a significant shareholder and then gradually growing that stake if you then sort of step in and change the ethos of that company. That's just not the way we do things. And it means that company can continue to thrive, but with a very significantly broader reach, both in terms of reaching new clients and reaching new opportunities.
I guess where the two things merge, your two activities, is the question on whether investment organisations can be healthy without embracing sustainability now, or is it a competitive advantage, or do you just feel it's a kind of a mission that you ought to do?
I think we have to take a step back. I think no organisation will be successful without having a very clear strategy linked to their core purpose of what they do. And any organisation that hasn't taken a step back and thought about what their purpose is and how their strategy flows from that, I think will struggle, particularly when you've got sort of some of the trading headwinds we've got at the moment because of the global economy and the macroeconomic environment. I think for some people, that purpose will link naturally to sustainability because they're thinking about building 20, 30, 40-year businesses. They've got clients in pension funds or early stage savers who they want to be there for 20 to 30 years. Therefore, they will be thinking about sustainability as a responsibility, not just the amount of money somebody will have when they want to move into retirement, but also the world they will want to actually move into. So I think that's really, really important. So I think it's a really passionate way of gaining traction within an organization. I think employees look for that purpose as well. But there are other ways. I mean, there are firms who are not sustainable and they will be honest about it. That's fine. I think it's increasingly tricky to believe that you can run a business for 20, 30 years horizons with your clients and grow with your clients and not think about the long-term challenges that the world faces, societal and environmental. And whether that's financial services or whether that's other companies like those you invest in, those my colleagues at Schroders invest in. So I think as a very high minimum, thinking about the risks that you're not thinking about, if you know what I mean, is important. But I think I would never say that anything's mandatory, and not in free markets.
Okay.
I do think, though, conscious thought is very, very important.
And it sounds like you're setting your stall out to appeal to a particular brand of customer then, who is thinking more sustainably. And I suspect you've got history on your side in a big way. But can you do it just through the sort of rise of consumer demand for sustainability, or do you need government support to change regulation?
Great question. We need more global reporting frameworks. And I think there it's less about regulation and legislation. It's enabling the ISSB and the IFRS to come up with frameworks that we need. I think I would love to see governments not going into a race on impact and sustainability reporting. I'd much rather see a sort of commitment to have a global conversion around particular standards, because that's what we need. Very, very few people invest just in a single country or a single sector. So you need to have a framework for convergence. So I think that's enabling regulation. I think there always have to be safeguards against poor practice, but that's a baseline sort of safety net against poor practice in a market. The extent to which you then regulate practice or incentivize practice, I think, is always becomes a bit more philosophical about the legislative mindset of different governments. And it'll be very different country by country as to how capital markets should evolve, how a trading should evolve. And you will see countries in the world where absolutely they would not regulate. And you'll see others where they don't believe change will happen without regulation. I think for a global firm or a global enterprise, and the Impact Investing Institute does try and work globally in terms of our outreach and helping people, one has to be really thoughtful about the regulatory and legislative environments in which you're working, and not mandate a single way of doing things.
Thank you. That's really interesting. And I'm going to move the questions on a little bit, if I may, to talk about innovation. At our business, we are firm believers in the power of innovation to address, in particular, climate change.
Yeah.
But there are other points of view. So where are you on that spectrum in terms of the Impact Investment Institute and Schroders and the need to embrace innovative new technologies to address these challenges?
Well, I wouldn't conflate both Impact and Schroders. I think we have to sort of separate that out, because, I wouldn't say that one strategy is the same for either company. And so let's talk about the Impact Investing Institute on this one. There's absolutely no doubt at all that advances in computing and digital techniques, even before you got to generative AI, are going to help in terms of digesting data, finding data and digesting it. So that must help in terms of gathering what we need, whether it's science-based or other-based information that can give us more insight into environmental and social challenges and what's working and where it's working. I think you probably already invest in some of these things yourselves. Geospatial mapping of terrain to see what's actually happening, the use of fertilizers, the use of water, things like that. Things we can do now that we could never have done without going out and sort of doing surveys everywhere. That's a huge advantage. I think, though, as we move from a transition from where we are now, the sort of the economies we have now, and we move into the world of the future, and we move towards a greener and hopefully fairer world, we have to think explicitly about the consequences of using digital and generative AI. And we have to be very, very thoughtful about the roles and the opportunities that are created, particularly for parts of society that have habitually been excluded. I don't think there's a part of the world that won't be touched by generative AI over time, unless regulation slams down on it, which I think is almost impossible now to do, because it's sort of the genie's out of the bottle. And therefore, having clear policies around its usage, I think, are very important, just as we have clear policies around the use of data. And deeper than that, I think if you're investing in adaptive or mitigation or renewable technologies, thinking about the creation of sustainable jobs and skills and the impact of them in communities has to go hand in hand with the technical developments and innovations that you're making. Has to.
Absolutely. And you've touched on this a few times now, the just transition. And so the sensation you're giving me just to test it is that, yes, there'll be lots of innovation, it will be really important, but maybe the rate limiting step is going to be the ability of society to effect a just transition, because after all, if it isn't just, people are not going to go along with it. Is that
well,
right?
That's certainly our philosophy at the Institute. We don't think there will be, ultimately, we're talking about a massive change to the makeup of global GDP and to economies both developed, developing and underdeveloped. And so you can't impose the scale of potential economic disruption on those economies without thinking through what happens to the people whose livelihoods and the families whose livelihoods depend on it. And we've seen it in other industries. I mean, you can see it in terms of what was happening through globalization over the last 20 to 30 years, what happens to steel, what's happened to the coal mines, what's happened to agriculture. You can see that as globalization moves jobs to more and more cost-effective locations, so people get left behind in that. And unless there is a really clear policy and focus on redevelopment, you end up with some very, very unfair balances of who wins as you get some of these major economic trends. And what we're saying is, as you move towards the just transition, you've got a fantastic opportunity to incentivize individuals and communities to want to embrace greener technology, or to want to embrace how we can move from brown and sort of muddy green into cleaner green. But you have to bring people with them. You can't just say extractive industries are no longer accepted, and therefore those millions of people involved in them now have no livelihood. I mean, that just is not going to be sustainable. You will lead to social and political disruption and riot. And I think, that's something that is not always easy to talk about in policy terms. But when we come into the use of private capital, we absolutely can think about that. Because if we end up investing in an asset which becomes stranded, or where a community becomes stranded, there's both reputational and financial risk associated with that investment.
And there you're highlighting, I think, that whilst it's easy for people like me to talk about stranded assets, we don't often think about stranded people, and maybe we should.
We absolutely need to think about stranded communities, because they're the ones who will ultimately, frankly, have votes or have followership that can be instrumentalized. And I think this is a bit of a challenge for people. And I've had this philosophical challenge with many people who say, yes, you're right, but. And the but is always around the fact that we need to move so urgently on climate, we'll get round to this. Whereas my answer is, what really works in life? What really works in life is when you plan something very well, you think it through, and you execute brilliantly. So planning something on one dimension and then hoping for the best on the others is not going to lead to perfect and risk-free execution. So getting that thinking done now, and it's not rocket science. There are things we can do, and that's why we did our work during the UK G7 presidency as part of the Impact Task Force, to say, actually, this isn't about reinventing a whole new way of doing business. It's looking at information that's already routinely reported on and collected out there, and thinking about it in the context of how, as investors and financiers, we can use it to demonstrate our intentions for impact, both environmentally, socially, and also with community agency. And it becomes particularly true when you start to think about what happens in communities that we call them left behind. Here in the UK, there are many languages around the world for communities who have been previously exposed by rapid industrial revolution.
So is this in a nutshell why you don't really separate out, as I might tend to, environmental impact and social impact? Because to you, the one is a constraint upon or a cause of the other.
I would say you can separate them out in terms of the data you seek, the time frame over which you seek to establish change, and the means you use to drive change. But ultimately, if you don't have a framework that's capturing environmental, social, and consequences for communities, then you will fail. I mean, we can see it in some carbon offset projects where trees are planted, but the water they use is starving essential agriculture and other biohabitats. And so you absolutely have to think about this to avoid the unintended consequences of moving fast and in a very single dimension fashion.
Oh, so help me out here, because now I'm beginning to think this is all terribly complicated and difficult, and
very straightforward.
The answer is to slow down. And I don't
No, not at all. Not at all. It's very straightforward. It means that when you're doing a project, I don't know, give me one of your investments and let's dissect one of yours. Don't give me the name, just give me the as an example, and we'll talk about it.
Okay, I'll mention a topical one. We have a Greek company, which is an AI software company in shipping, and it sells its software to shipping organizations that put it on ships, and it helps them pilot the ships in a manner that creates a lot of fuel efficiency, saves about 10-12% of fuel.
Well, that's fantastic. So you've got an immediate economic benefit of that. And that can go straight to the shareholders, it can go straight to investors, or it can go into expansion of that company. If you start to say, from the economic benefit, how are you treating your employees? You've created an economic benefit as well as an environmental benefit. we're assuming that we are not doing it at the expense of low wages, poor working behaviour, piece rate, lack of insurance, lack of health cover. We're assuming that in getting to that environmental outcome, you are treating your crews, your pilots, and your employees fairly, and that you're actually enriching their lives just as you're enriching the planet. So you simply focus on the role of employees. Secondly, you could say, okay, great company. When you're recruiting into that company, and let's hope it's growing strength by strength, are you making sure that you're doing socially inclusive recruitment rather than just the easy stuff? Are you making sure that as you recruit, you're thinking about the diversity and inclusion of your workforce that you're recruiting? So I think it's really, I think it's so close to good business practice. It's not difficult.
Yeah. And in fact, it sounds to me like you're saying that, and I would then start to use the phrase ESG to cover those sorts of compliance with good practices.
Well, I think I don't think ESG covers it properly, because I think it's not the avoiding harm piece. It's proactively seeking to enrich the lives of certainly your employees, probably your supply chain, and potentially your customers. So it's enriching lives, it's enriching the quality of that life and the sustainability of that. And actually that's quite self-serving, because it means people want to work for this company. You have skilled labor that doesn't want to go away. You're creating benefits. So I see that as a beneficial outcome rather than a hygiene factor. And I think thinking about the beneficial outcomes, think about the way in which the ships come into port. So you're piloting brilliantly. When you come into port, are you very thoughtful about the way in which you treat the environment in which you port, the communities that are going to support that ship while it's there and being reloaded? Are you doing it in a way that actually it's great while you're at sea, but as soon as you land, who knows? We don't know what people are going to do on shore. We don't know what's going to happen in that community, how exploited that community is. I see this as sustainable business practice that goes beyond the do no harm level. It's thinking really constructively and positively. You think about coffee manufacturers who are not just doing free trade, but they're also thinking about the skills of the farmers, the water usage of the farmers, the use of different chemicals on the land, and creating the skills in those communities around those plantations that mean they can do it themselves rather than have to pay others to come in and certify it. So you're creating new jobs and skills around that best practice. It might just be one or two new jobs and skills, but it changes the way in which you run your business to be much more holistic and thoughtful.
I love the ethos, and I think it's completely right. And really, aren't you just saying people ought to run high caliber businesses with compassion?
I think they should. And I think given that we have people like yourselves and then they're turning to Schroders who want evidence of that, it makes an awful lot of sense about being just a little bit more explicit about what your intention was and what the impact is that you're seeking to have. So then you move very much from, yes, we want to run compassionate, good quality businesses. Great. We tick the box. We assess ourselves at the end of the year and we think we're doing a jolly good job, to saying, this is why we're doing it, because we want the health outcomes for our employees, the injury rates for our employees to be the best in class. We want to know that when we dock in places, those communities are getting a benefit from our ships being there, as opposed to being depleted when we leave. And this is how we're going to measure it. So it's moving to that intentionality piece, Patrick, which is, I think, where society is going to take us anyway in 5 to 10 years. And I think the political risks of something being forced on us as opposed to being ahead of the curve and doing it in a way that makes sense for our businesses, it's absolutely right for us to do that ourselves.
In fairness, I completely agree. I'd love to disagree because it'll be more fun, but I do agree. But listening to you, I hear not just a sense of passion, but actually quite a lot of creativity. But you must be a really busy person. Probably people won't know this, but you also, in the spare time, which I don't understand that you have at all, you write crime fiction novels. And I love the fact that you were on the shortlist of an award called Dagger in the Library.
I was. You've done your research. Very good. Yeah. I was on the shortlist for Dagger in the Library.
Just yes. Fantastic. So how on earth do you have the time? And is it helpful to you? Because to be a crime writer, you must have a kind of a dark side to your mind, right? So
there's a theory. There's a theory that the crime writers don't, and actually it's the romantic writers that do. Because we write books and all that creativity, which you say is a dark side, goes onto the page and it's out of your brain. And we look around us and the world is always better than the books we write, candidly. Whereas if you're writing sort of romantic fiction, the idea is that You put all this wonder down onto the page. It's all beautiful. You take it all out of yourself and you look up and the world isn't quite so lovely. So it's a bit of an in-joke in crime writing circles, which probably isn't appreciated by romantic fiction writers. But it's, I mean, they are among the most lovely, generous and kind people, crime writers, I have to say. It's one of those organizations and groups that they want other writers to thrive and succeed. And it's lovely, you know, you can go up to really well-established, famous authors, which is usually the sort of 0.01% of authors in any list, and they will want to help you. And it's a fantastic community.
No, it sounds fantastic. And I love the titles, by the way. So I'm just going to mention a couple.
Do. They're all available on Amazon.
And the Dead of Winter. It just sounds like fun. But it sounds like you're a real optimist as well. And I hadn't imagined a crime writer to be an optimist. So that's a discovery for me. Am I right to think of you as an optimist? And why?
Yeah, I think I'm a pragmatic optimist. I think I do definitely see a glass half full rather than glass half empty in most situations. And I will always try and look for the good in, particularly in an outcome or what could be worse. So that's true. And I think there is a similar creativity that you use in fiction, that same creativity would come into business. I can remember in the heart of the financial crisis in 2008, I didn't write at all because every ounce of creativity had to be in basically running the business and thinking ways through. So I would never have said it's the same source of creativity. I don't think it is. But nevertheless, I had to use every ounce of it during 2008, which is why there was a pause before my third book. And then when the market started to get better again, I started writing again, which was quite interesting.
Oh, very good. So as and when a new book's published, I'll know that you're feeling optimistic then.
Well, there's also just 8 hours in the day as well. I do manage to write most weeks, but not every week. And there are other things like family and other hobbies that tend to get in the way. But I do love writing, and I do find it a fantastic hobby to relax with.
Oh, great. And what is it that makes you optimistic as you're looking around from the perspective of the Institute then? Because I'd love to close on your view of the future here and what makes you so excited and upbeat.
Well, I think that's where the pragmatic realism has to come in. We have to remember that for many people, the cost of living crisis and rising interest rates, this is in developed countries we're talking about now. Let's not get near the global south for a minute. There are some really harsh realities that people are having to deal with. And I think it's all very well for me to be optimistic. I don't think that takes away from the need. And by the way, I'm a huge believer in philanthropy standing alongside impact investing. I don't think it's either or. I think that you have to have philanthropy, grant giving, very, very high risk taking money out there in the markets, as well as what impact capital can do. So I am optimistic for impact investing. Yes, I am, because I think the time is now. I think the time is right. We haven't talked about the work we're doing on domestically for place-based impact investing. This is enabling places where they have assets that are absolutely investable and trying to connect them with sources of private capital. The conversations now are so rich, so exciting. People are looking for opportunities to be inventive around ways to invest in places that previously have been ignored, candidly. So I think there's lots of sources of optimism. I think the geopolitical tensions are tricky. So I don't think one can be too rose-tinted about the context in which to be optimistic. But for impact investing particularly, I think there's more innovation, more ideas, more people wanting to make a difference rather than just make money for themselves. There are more people who really believe they're in it for the longer term and they want to contribute to a better society. And that has to be a source of optimism.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. Elizabeth, thank you so much. That was a great deal of fun and extremely interesting. I do appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Patrick. Good luck with it and look forward to keeping in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sustainability Talks podcast. To find out more or join as a guest, head over to the ETF Partners website at etfpartners.capital. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn and follow us on Medium at ETF Partners. Until next time, thanks for listening.